It was one of those like on the border. Is it going to be number 10 or not? And
Yeah.
for the same reason, I'm not a huge fan of the game, but it is a monumental feat of game design.
Yes,
and I think I was at Origins or something around the time it came out, and it's all people could talk about. It's like, have you seen this game? It wasn't like, oh, this game is amazing, I love it. They're just like, have you seen this? Have you seen what this dude did? Like, game design, or the fun or the enjoyment. Yeah. We're not worried about that right now. And a lot of people love it. It's still a great game. But just the ability to put something like that together and it works. But to your point, it does have some interesting downsides. So, Pam, really excited to have you here. Excited to dive into an episode I've never done before. I've never done a show like this where we're just chatting about all sorts of games. We're talking about games that people should be playing, that they should be analyzing, that they should like be taking notes with. Like, I think that's another thing as a game designer, you kind of never play a game again because it's deeper now. Like, as you're playing, you're looking at the choices that the designer made and the choices that the graphic designer and the artist made and the production value. Like, you're looking at a zillion different things, and in some ways maybe kind of ruins gaming. Like, I've talked to designers, they're like, yeah, I used to enjoy playing games a lot more than I do now because now I can't turn the design brain off. And so I think that's interesting challenge, but not necessarily a bad thing. It's kind of like watching film. You know, if you're trying to get better at anything, you go find the people doing it the best, whether it's comedians or speech writers or whatever, and you just see how they do it and you break it down. And I think that's what we're going to be doing here, just talking about some of, not necessarily our favorite games, because I've got a bunch of games on my list that I don't really like necessarily, that I'm not going to pull off the shelf. I'll play if somebody asks me to. But these are games that I feel like people should play, even if you only play it once. And so before we get into these lists, tell me your process. Like, how did you come up with your games? What were you thinking about as far as like categorizing different things, just to give people context? Because this is not like a top 10. It's not like, oh, we're going to go from number 10 down to number 1. It's a little different. So tell me about your process.
So I actually made a video of the 21 games I think every board game designer should play. And my process for that was trying to hit every single major mechanic. So trying to expose designers to every single major mechanic that I could think of. So for this, I did take some from that list, but then I added some new ones as well. And so I'm just trying to have a good breadth of games where if I were to meet a new designer, I would give them this list of 10 games and be like, go play these 10 games and you will learn so much from these different types of themes, mechanics, being exposed to different designers that they should know about. So it's just a broad range of games that I think new designers should definitely check out.
Yeah, one thing I always advise designers is don't only look at or watch reviews or play games based on the specific thing you're designing. Like, if you're working on a worker placement game, don't just do worker placement stuff. Go do some party games. Go do some deck building. Like, see some other mechanisms and experiences, because that's going to inform everything as well. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm not designing that kind of game, understood. Play these anyway, because you're going to learn some things. And even if you don't learn anything, like you're saying, from the mechanism, you're going to learn from the designer. Like, why did they make this choice? Right. And so, tell me about that. What are some things that maybe you learned from these games? Like, I'm assuming these are games that you've played, that you've figured out and all that. What are some of just the general concepts you've kind of learned overall? And then let's get more specific when we get into the actual kind of nitty gritty.
Sure. So one of the biggest things, as being a good game, a good designer, is you want to give players interesting choices. So that's one of the most interesting thing is, does the game offer interesting choices? And a lot of the games on my list do that in really interesting ways. How do the players interact with each other? That's always very interesting to me as well. So then also maybe what not to do, trying to cram in too much into a game sometimes. Those are the sort of general things. And also when you're looking at theme, trying to be different and unique, not always doing the same overdone themes, different things like that. I don't want to give too much away before getting into the list.
Yeah, absolutely. To your point though, another thing to think about is bad games. Now, none of the games on our list, I don't think, at least my list, are bad by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of them are very well loved. They're in the top 200, 500 or so on Board Game Geek. They've made a lot of money selling a lot of copies, but there's so much value in playing terrible games, right? It's kind of like when rain is scarce, you pray for it. You know what I mean? Like when you don't have the balance of the good and the bad, it's kind of hard to understand the context, the full context. And so, if you play a game, and even if it is an awful experience, there's value in that, right? And so
Yeah.
I don't know that I'll ever do a don't play these games. I'm not trying to start any kind of internet drama with some game designers,
No,
you know,
no, no, no,
but
no.
but
Yeah.
good things to think about. But anyway, let's get into our lists, and I'll let you go first, guess first, and
Sure.
technically number 10, but like this is just kind of, you know, it's not like a ranked thing. So what's the first thing
Yeah.
that comes to mind?
So yeah, the first game on my list is Imhotep. And this is a game by Phil Walker Harding. And so every designer should know about Phil Walker Harding. He is probably my favorite designer. He has a great catalog of games. Any game that he comes out with, I'm like, I want to play that. And they're all so different. It's like he's done Sushi Go, Silver and Gold, Gizmos. He just came out with one called Spellbook I played at Gen Con. So he's just a great designer for other designers to know about, first of all. Secondly, this is just a really fun game. So the idea is you're all ancient Egyptian architects and you're building pyramids and obelisks and different things like that. And so you're all trying to gather resources and then load them on ships. But the interesting thing, one of the most interesting interactions between players is that any player can launch the ship and decide which action space it goes to. So you could send a ship that doesn't even have any of your resources on it. It has all other player resources on it, and you can send it to an action space that you think will not benefit the other players as much as possible. So there's a little bit of take that in that, and I don't love take that, but the way that he does it is so interesting because you will still get something out of it. You'll still get something good out of it. Just might not be your ideal plan A. And so I think that's just really interesting. I've never seen that in a game before, where you have like a plan, you're loading up a ship, but then someone else can send it to a different action space. So yeah, it's just a very interesting game. The player interaction is very interesting. It deals with a sort of take that mechanic in an interesting way, and just an introduction to Phil Walker Harding.
Yeah, I love Phil. He's been on the show in the past. One of my favorite games of all time is Barren Park, which he did. It's a polyomino game about building a park for bears. It's kind of literal in the bear park, but it's a great game. But to your point, completely different than
Yes.
Imhotep that you're talking about. Like his brain is phenomenal because like
Yeah.
I'm the kind of designer, and I know a lot of other designers. You kind of get in your lane. You're like, this is what I do.
Yes.
I'm good at it. I've play tested these types of systems a million times. I'm just going to stay right here. This is where I block and where I tackle.
Right.
Phil is like, I'm going to go do something that I've never done before, and it's still going to be one of the best games in the world.
Yes, exactly. Every game you play by his, is completely different. I played Spellbook, and it was the only game I played at Gen Con. And because I saw it, I was like, I'm playing that. And because it was so busy at Gen Con, you couldn't demo any games, but I waited around till I could finally play it. And it's just so different from any of his other games, but just like all of his other games is so mechanically sound and is so interesting and different. So he's definitely a designer that inspires me for sure.
Yeah, 100%. All right. So the first, I'm going to cheat on a few of these just to let you know where I've got like some either ors, or I've got like this or that.
Sure.
So the first one that I really thought about is really based on, you know, I've interviewed over 300 designers at this point, and the same 4 games come up over and over and over again, especially as far as like games that got people into the hobby, got people into designing. And so my first one is those 4, which and these are all well known. It's Catan, it's Dungeons and Dragons, it's chess, and it's Magic the Gathering. Those 4 games seem to be, I would say that those 4 games have brought 90+% of game designers into game design. With me, it was Dungeons and Dragons. I know Rob Davio was Dungeons and Dragons. I've talked to a lot of other people. It was Catan. Chess, you know, a lot of people grow up playing chess and kind of gets their wheels turning, at least into this, not necessarily the space of game design exactly, but at least in the space of like playing games and just kind of normalizing it in their lives. And so anyone listening to this, one, you've probably played all of them, if not most of them. But to go back and study why these 4 games in particular changed the world, because they all did in different ways. Right? Yeah. People still play these games, you know, and a lot of times gamers, they'll come in with Catan and they're like, oh, well, Catan, it doesn't have this or that. And they'll kind of like throw shade at it once they get into the wider world of gaming. But I still have friends that Catan is the only game they play. They get together once a week with their Catan gaming group, not their gaming group, their Catan gaming group.
Yes.
And they play that, and they, you know, they'll throw in the expansions and they'll play the Game of Thrones version. They change things up, but it's still Catan. Why? Why do people keep coming back to that game? Same with Magic the Gathering. Just the ability to construct a deck and like have all these different combos and all these different things you can do. I mean, that game's been around since the early 90s, I think, late 80s. Like, it's been around a long, long time. Made billions of dollars. So it's easy to look at some of these games that kind of everybody likes, and we're like, well, you know, I like this thing you've never heard of that there's only like 42 copies on the market. Like, cool, fine. But there's a lot of value in looking at why did these games make such an impact. So Pam, with you, what game got you into the hobby or got you into gaming or game design?
Yeah, and I was asked this actually just the other day, and I don't remember like a certain specific like aha moment or anything like that. What I think it was a board game cafe opened up near me when I was in Toronto, Snakes and Lattes, one of the first board game cafes ever, and it was teeny tiny. Now it's huge. And so I think it was that, just being exposed to a board game cafe with a million different kinds of games and just started playing a million different kinds of games. I think that was really the door, kind of opened a little bit, and then it got flung open as soon as I joined the design group in Toronto at Snakes and Lattes, meeting other designers, them talking about different games. So I would check it out, mentioning different things. So I would try that out. So just being exposed, getting more into the community. I then learned about all the games that exist that I didn't know about.
Yeah. Is that something you did on your own, or were you invited?
To go to the design group?
Well, to go to Snakes and Lattes at the beginning.
I heard that this board game cafe was opening down the street from me, and I just went and checked it out. And then they were on Twitter, and I saw that they posted they have a design meetup, and I saw that. And I was like, oh my God, that's a thing. It was happening that night. I ran down the street to go do it. And then like Christopher Chung, who designed Lanterns, was one of the play testers who play tested my game the very first time I went to one of these things. And I was just like completely hooked after that.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And I had a similar experience of like, wait, what is this? Like this exists? Like, what is this world that I did not know of? That apparently there's a whole bunch of opportunities. So yeah, that's really cool. But all right. So moving on, what's your next one?
Just another thought about that too is that I do remember playing Ticket to Ride, and that was my first exposure to like a modern board game, I'm pretty sure. And I just remember feeling completely overwhelmed and not having fun at all. And just
Ticket to Ride too complicated.
Yeah, I was just like, what is happening? Like, I had only been used to, like party games, trivia games, very simple roll and move games. And this was like a gamer friend of mine, like friend of a friend. He played Ticket to Ride, and I was just like, yeah, I was just completely overwhelmed by it. So that did not hook me in. So I can't remember what other game it was, but now I play Ticket to Ride and I love it. But when you're first exposed to these games, they can be overwhelming, absolutely, if you're used to just sort of the standard roll and move.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so moving on to number 2, which is definitely not an intro game, definitely not beginner friendly, super heavy game. It's called Robinson Crusoe, and I don't know if you've played this, Gabe.
Oh yeah, I almost put it on my list. I almost did.
Oh, okay.
I was really close, but it was like coming down to like the final slot, and it was one that was up there. So anyway, great game. Go ahead.
So yeah, so as a designer, I always want to continue to push myself and to, like you said, play games outside my comfort zone, but also play games that are heavier than what I might be comfortable with or used to. So there's a lot going on in this game. Be prepared to watch an hour-long how to play video and then struggling through it for 3 to 4 hours. So yeah, it's on my list because it is a great game. But it's a very heavy game, so just be exposed to that. But then I would also challenge designers to play it, and maybe while you're playing it, think about one thing that could have been cut. Because I do think there is a lot going on, and I think the publisher was very nice to the designer, just let them do whatever they wanted. I mean, it all makes sense. Everything there that's in the game has a purpose. Everything works together very well. But some of the rules are a bit finicky. Some of the things you forget are there. Some of the things you're like, oh, wait, when I do this, then I can do that. But it doesn't happen all the time. It just happens this one specific time. It can be a little bit finicky sometimes. But it is a fantastic game. But from a designer point of view, I would maybe look at it and think, if this is my game, what would I maybe streamline a little bit from it?
Yeah, no, that's a really good idea with any game in general, right? How could you change a mechanism, cut a mechanism? How would that affect the game? You know, Robinson Crusoe has those dice, which a lot of people loathe because they do all these things. They build up these strategies, they get everything in place, and then the dice just wreck you, and there's nothing you can do about it because Lady Luck was like, haha, not today. And so, like, what would it do to the game to make that a card-based system where there's still the luck of the draw, but you can count the cards, like, what your odds are, you know the percentage is a little bit better.
Sure.
Like, how would that change the game?
And you could maybe stack it. You could add more good things into the deck to maybe potentially help you, so there's a less of a chance of something terrible happening, because so many terrible things happen in this game.
Exactly. Which is one of my favorite things, though. I love the system in that game of you have the card and you read it, and then it's got like, it's going to come back later. You know, you have to put it back in the deck. And you're like, oh man, now you know it's in there. You're like, oh, the tiger's coming back to eat me. It's going to happen.
Yeah. Or like you eat something and then it comes back later and you get sick. Like there's so many clever things in this game. So in case anyone doesn't know, so you're stranded on an island, and there are different scenarios. The basic one is you're trying to build a fire to alert a ship that's going by in time, or you all die. So it's a cooperative strategy game with all different kinds of scenarios, and you're all trying to work together to not die, but you definitely probably will die. But there's so many different smart things going on. I love how if two people go do something, it's a guaranteed success. But if you decide as a group, one of you is going to go do it, then you have to roll dice. I think that alone is just such a cool thing. There's so many cool things happening in this game, and I don't even know if you have to cut anything, but it's just an interesting exercise to think, if I wanted to streamline this game, what could maybe be cut, or what could maybe be clarified, or maybe not so edge case kind of finicky situations.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Excellent choice. My next one is a game called Kimmit. You ever played Kimmit?
I've heard of it, haven't played it.
Phenomenal game. It's kind of this like Egyptian adjacent thing going on, where it's like pyramids and pharaohs and all the like Egyptian mythological creatures and stuff like that. But it's basically a war game. So if you like Risk, then Kimmit is like the way better version of it, right? One thing I love about Kimmit, so let me back up. One of the problems with Risk is somebody can turtle. They can go down there in Australia and it's like hard to get at them, and there's other people up here and they're going at it, but it's not balanced. Like, the map is not balanced.
Right.
Kimmit changed that, in that pretty much every space can reach almost every other space. And when you start the game, you have equal access to everyone else on the board, the way the map is arranged, like the areas. Okay. And you can also teleport, and like you can do different things. So like nobody is safe. You can't just turtle somewhere. Like if you're doing really well, everybody else is going to come get you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And it's great because it kind of self-balances in that way. But players can also go totally different paths to victory. There's all sorts of different strategies that you can take, different types of creatures that do different types of things. The combat system is phenomenal. It's not dice-based, it's card-based. And it's kind of that you've got these cards in your hand and you're going to play one, and it's going to do different things, and you're going to, look at the numbers, stuff like that. But it's not just winning and losing. It's also basically how many casualties you take, right? So you could win the battle, but end up losing more men on the board than your opponent. It's this really interesting thing, and different cards do different things. And so, it's especially early on in the game, what your opponent has. And so then you're like, oh, do I go all out? Do I play this, like, do I play my best card? And then, basically, because if you play it, then you lose it for a little while. Anyway, phenomenal system. If anyone is creating a game that has combat, that has any kind of skirmish, has any kind of board movement as well, highly, highly recommend.
Very cool. Very cool. Who designed that one?
I do not know. I'll look that up and I'll tell you in a second. You go ahead. What's your next one?
Okay. Yes. Okay. So my next one is Creature Comforts by Roberta Taylor. It is a dice worker placement game. And I love worker placement games in general, because again, it comes down to choices. You have so many different things you could do on your turn. And I love how it's a bit of a race to see if you can get to that space first. This one is slightly different. But the main reason it's on my list is because of the theme. So I mentioned this earlier, that a lot of themes, in my opinion, are overdone. And this game has one of the most interesting and different themes that I've seen in any game. So the theme is you're all different animals, and you're all getting ready for winter and you're trying to make your dens as cozy as possible. And I just love that. It's so different. It's just, I'm so kind of tired of seeing the same theme over and over and over, especially at playtesting meetups. It's just, oh, here's another one of those kinds of games. So it's just, we're so refreshing. And so as a designer, it's good to see different kinds of themes, different interesting worlds you can create, different themes you can have. And this does that really, really well. The art is amazing. You really feel like you're building up your little den, and you have your little soup, and you have your socks, and you have your like blanket, and it's just fantastic. So it's a great game mechanically, but theme-wise, it's different and interesting. So it hits both of those 2 points very well.
Yeah, I love that. I love anytime a game can have some interesting things thematically going on, but at the same time, it still makes sense with the mechanisms. Like things still intersect and you go, oh, that makes sense. Like it's still intuitive. Yeah, that's really cool. So the designers of Kimmit, I'm going to totally butcher these names, but I think it's Jacques Barriot and Guillaume French. It's in French. I don't know what it is. My Alabama accent does not let me say those letters next to each other. But it's from Madigo. It's from 2012. Like a lot of the games on my list are OGs. Like they've been around a long time. And I think that kind of is another thing to think about. It's like if people are still playing this game, they're still buying it. I mean, chess has been around a zillion years. You know, Catan, D&D, Magic the Gathering, Kimmit, several more on my list are from like 10 plus years ago. Yes. And they're still selling copies. It's like, huh.
Yes.
Maybe
that definitely tells you something for sure. And there's a lot of cult of the new in the board game community. Yeah. So no, I think it's great there's so many great games that are 10, 20, 30 years old for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a lot of flash in the pan stuff right now. It's a game that comes out and you're like, oh, you know, that's fine. But it's not a favorite game. It's a 3 out of 5.
Yeah.
You know, I think I would rather have a game that a certain group of people are like, this is my favorite game of all time. And then a lot of other people are like, I hate this. I never want to see it again. I would rather have that than just a game where people are in general are like, yeah, it's fine. You know, something to think about as a designer. You know,
you want a strong reaction one way or the other.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and find your people. You know,
right? Yeah.
Not every games aren't for everybody. Like you can't. If you create a game for everybody, it's a game for nobody. So how can you really lean into your target audience so that it's their favorite game? It's one of their top 10 games of all time.
Yeah.
Knowing that in doing that, you're going to have a whole bunch of other people who are like, I hate this. This is nothing I want to see at all. And that's okay. If you go to Amazon and you look at the best books ever written, those books have a bunch of 1-star reviews. It just is what it is. So something to think about. All right, my next one, speaking of games been around a long time, Twilight Imperium, which is now in its 4th edition, or if you're not quite into that, Dune, which has been around a zillion years as well. And these are the kind of games that take forever to play. Yeah. Dune is like a 3+ hour experience. Twilight Imperium, 4+, 5+, depending on how many players are at the table. And so why would I tell you to sit down and play one of these games, even if you have no desire? Because I want a designer to understand what it takes for a game to last that long and still be good.
Yes.
Because I don't know about you, I've made 20-minute games that lasted too long. Where players are like, this is too long. This needs to be 5 minutes. I'm like, okay, I'm sorry.
Yes.
But you've got these games that these are 2 games that like people say are their favorites of all time. Like I can't tell you how many people I've met that say, oh, I love Twilight Imperium, one of my top 3 favorites of all time. That's crazy. And they will devote a weekend bringing friends over, planning out the meals for the day because it's going to take all day because they're playing a 6-player game or something crazy. Yeah. And they'll do it all day and they love it. And they'll get to the end and they just feel satisfied. So as a designer, how can you design a game that takes up a long time, but it's still good the whole way? And one thing you learn about these games is it's different systems. Players aren't just thinking about one thing. They're thinking about a whole bunch of stuff in chunks, in bites, right? In Twilight Imperium, there's combat. There's the voting where you can bring new laws in. They're going to change the game in some way. There's just so many different little phases that kind of keep your brain working. And none of the phases in and of themselves are big. They're all pretty small. There's just a bunch of them. And they can stack on top of each other. And so, and also with anytime you see a new edition, like this is a 4th edition, what do they change? Why?
Yes.
Why do they take that out? Why do they add that in? And just analyzing that. So let me toss that back to you. Have you seen any games that you enjoy that have come out with a later edition or an expansion that changed the game in certain ways? You're like, oh, and you kind of saw something new that was really cool?
Nothing is jumping to mind where they like fixed a major error in an updated edition.
Yeah, it could be. Or change a mechanism. Like I'm working on a game right now that came out a couple years ago. It's Hunted
Yeah.
Kobayashi Tower, and it's very dice based. And I made that game because I wanted it to have a lot of luck and a lot of just like swingy. I wanted that, but then the more
Yes.
people played it, they're like, "Oh, it's just too much." It's like, "Oh, okay." And so going back in and changing D6s to D8s, adding some cards in that add just a little bit extra mitigation, where you can go +1 or -1, or just a few tweaks have drastically changed the swinginess of the game. Still a lot of luck. And so it doesn't have to be a massive change. It could also just be the rule book. A lot of times second editions just fix the rule book and how trash they were first time around. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, one of my games is a second edition, but it's just like a retheme. I don't think they really changed anything or updated anything.
So what theme to what theme?
Well, it's actually, should I just talk about it now?
Oh, heck yeah, if it's on your list, go for it.
It's on my list, yeah. So yeah, it's Century Spice Road Golem Edition. So the first one is just, yeah, I guess you're collecting spices on a spice road. Now this one, you're collecting crystals and then forming them into golems. I don't even know what a golem was until I played this game. The theme is almost unnecessary in this game. But I did actually look that up this morning about what's different between the first edition and the Golem edition. And from what I saw, they didn't tweak any rules or anything like that. So I guess it was pretty solid from the jump. But the reason it's on my list is that it's a very interesting engine builder. And it seems like engine builders have a tough time of finding themes that actually, are intuitive, make sense, help learn the game more, are immersive. Splendor Sentry Spice Road. I didn't even really know what the theme was. I didn't remember what the theme was. I had to look it up this morning. Like, wait, what's the theme? I just remember enjoying it, but the theme didn't stick with me. But it's a great engine builder. And also there's open drafting. You are collecting cards. There's deck building. You're building up a strong deck. You're playing them. So there's a lot going on in this game, but they all work really well together. And it is fairly simple. But I just found it so satisfying to build up my crystals, and you're restricted with how many you can hold at one time. So it's all about timing as well. And there's also with the open drafting, there's that race element again, too, of you're trying to get a card before someone else, but you can see what everyone else might be going for. So there's just so many things that work really well together. And I just love engine builders where as the game goes on, you're doing more and better things. It's just so satisfying, especially when you have a deck builder element where you can have that hand management where you can decide when to play your different actions. So yeah, it's a fantastic game. And then with the Golem edition, the major difference, I guess, is upgrading the components. So instead of the little cubes for the spices, now you have these really cool, shiny crystals in different beautiful colors. And then the art is really nice as well. But that's secondary to the mechanics. The mechanics are just so satisfying. I only played this game one time, but I was like, oh, I love this game. So if you want to play an engine builder, I would definitely suggest playing that because it's not just engine building, it's also deck building, open drafting, things like that.
Yeah, definitely. So the designer of that one, Emerson Matsuuchi. Anyway, phenomenal guy. I've hung out with him at conventions. He's just a great dude to be around. But his brain is just kind of like Phil Walker Harding. It's just like they're on a different level. Like they just see things differently. And yeah, that game is definitely a great example of that. And to your point about the theme, yeah, that game is so themeless, you could literally slap on anything and it would still be fine.
Yeah.
Like it's an engineering game. It's not a thematic deal.
Doesn't even need a theme.
No, not at all. But you're right though, in the satisfaction. It's something about our little lizard brains that love taking blue and turning it into purple and then turning it into green. I don't know why. Like there's so many games on the market that do that. And Splendor was one. So that's something to think about.
Cashing them all in for this golem card that gives you points and and getting it before someone else. So I love that where you have to be aware of what the other players are doing because they might get what you want first. Because a lot of games you can be, in your own little silo, but in games like that where you have the open drafting, you have to be a lot more aware about what your other players are doing.
Yeah. So follow up to that, my next game I'll do is called Le Havre. You ever played Le Havre?
No.
Okay.
I'm adding all these games to my list of
2008. All right.
Yeah.
A while back, still holds up today. Same concept though with what you're talking about with Spice Road, in that you're taking this, turning it into that, turning it into this other thing, scoring points. This is how I'm going to build up this thing and win the game. It's not quite as engine buildy as Sentry, but it's still, there's all these buildings out and all these cards are the building, so the cards change every game, so it's always different, right? And you've got these special buildings that come out and do interesting things. You have a ton of resources. I'm trying to think, there's fish, there's wheat, there's cows, there's like all sorts of different like iron and metals and different things like that, and you're constantly like, and the tiles are all these tokens that are double-sided, and so wheat is, you know, wheat on one side, and then on the other side it's bread. And fish are fried fish, cows are meat, and then you can also turn cattle into hides, and then turn the hides into clothing, and then trade, you know, sell the clothing for points. And so it's such a cool game, but on your turn, you're not doing very much. I think that's another thing that a lot of these great games have. They're not overwhelming the players with too many choices at a time, but in general, there are lots of choices, right? And one thing I love about Le Havre is like, there's no, oh, that's the best choice, and then there's nothing else. Like, okay, there's these other choices I could do, but that's the obvious. Le Havre, it's like, do I want this really good choice, or that other really good choice, or I could do this other really cool thing that sets me up for an amazing choice next time.
Right.
There's so many cool things you could do, and I would only play it with 2 or 3 players, though. That's the one, I will say one negative. 4-player is not great, just because the way this turn structure is broken down, it just doesn't work as well with 4. But 2 or 3, phenomenal game. And it's got little fun Easter egg things, like for instance, the church building will take bread and like turn it into more. It's like it turns a certain number of loaves into more loaves. It's like, I see what you did there biblically. It's got little fun things, but it's just a great game. It's one of those things that you play it and you get done, you're like, I want to play it again, and it doesn't take that long to play. And you see where if you lose, you're like, I should have done this or that. Like, you have a pretty good sense of why you lost or why you won. And then but again, you could set it up, play again, and have a totally different experience, because the buildings that come out this time are going to be different, going to change your strategy. So definitely recommend Le Havre. That's LE space HAVRE.
Yes, it's on my list.
It's not Le Havre, which is what I called it for a long time. Anyway.
Well, I call golems Gollum, so I don't know.
Well, if you're familiar with Lord of the Rings,
I know, that's all I knew. I was like, Gollum, the Gollum edition. I don't know. Yeah, I was gonna say something about that. Oh yeah, so I don't know. There's something about upgrading things. There's something about crafting things and upgrading things that I just love. Like, I want to, get all these resources to pay them to craft this thing, and then I want to do something to flip it over to its better side, and now I get like, I don't know why that's so satisfying as humans, but I definitely get that for sure. And there is a lot of that in creature comforts as well. Yeah.
Something about going from nothing to something. Right. Yes. And same as in the real world. Right. If you're doing mission work, or you're building a house or anything, like, you start off and there's like a plot of land, and then, a certain amount of time later, we have a structure that people can live in. And it's just like so satisfying to your soul. And there's a lot of games that really lean into that and do well. And I think that's part of it. Engine builders, especially. Maybe it's because and maybe with engine builder, let me get your thoughts on this. One thing I found, I can't remember who told me this in an interview, but anyway, they said gamers, or people in general, they want to feel one of 3 things, if not more, at the same time. They want to feel rich, they want to feel powerful, they want to feel smart. So anytime your game can get them to feel that way, it's going to do well. And I feel like there's something with engine builders, you feel smart, because you're the one that came up with, I'm going to put A next to B next to C, and we're going to run this thing, and I'm going to win the game, right? So has that been something you've noticed as well?
Oh, for sure. 100%. And I think, you just want to feel like you built something at the end. You did something. Like, look how much I did. I started with nothing, and now I'm here. Like, absolutely. No, I agree with that 100%. So letting your players feel like, that's another thing too, even with party games, they want to feel funny, but not have to come up with the funny content, So it's like, look at this funny card that I picked to put in this scenario. Look how funny I am. But all they did was pick the card that you created with the actual funny content. But you are helping people, enabling people to feel like they're the funny ones. So these other things, you're helping people feel like they're the smart ones, because they combined these 2 cards that you made, but then they are doing that. So you're facilitating, people either feeling funny or smart or powerful, all these types of things. So you have to facilitate those situations.
All right. What's your next one?
Okay. So my next one is an ore. It's not 4 ores, but it's a vast ore route. So these are extreme asymmetrical games. you haven't heard of them, I'll take Vast as an example. So the scenario is there's this cave, there's a dragon inside the cave, and you can play one of, I think, 5 different characters. So if you play the knight, your goal is to kill the dragon. If you play the dragon, you're trying to get out from the cave. You play the goblin, you're trying to kill the knight. You can even play the cave, and you're trying to collapse onto the other players, which I find hilarious. So it's an asymmetric game, an extreme asymmetric game, meaning where each player has their own different set of rules and own different win condition. So it's almost like everyone is playing a different game, but you're all playing together. So yeah, I don't know if I'm the biggest fan of this mechanic, but I definitely sought this game out to play it because I wanted to be exposed to that type of game, that style of game. It is very interesting. One of the things I don't love about it is that you don't really know what other players are doing because you have to remember 4 sets of rules at a time. This especially is true with Root, which is another asymmetric game where each player has a very, usually somewhat complicated rule system and win condition. And so you're doing your own thing. You don't really know what everyone else is doing, but all of a sudden someone else won. So yeah, it's a very interesting system to play as a designer, be exposed to it, and maybe you find that you love it. And I just find it so interesting. I just think it's so great that one designer, I just appreciate the effort that it took to design essentially 4 or 5 for Root, 10 plus games in one. I just think that's a feat of designing engineering in itself, which I can appreciate. I might not enjoy necessarily, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Root was again, it was one of those like on the border. Is it going to be number 10 or not? And for the same reason, I'm not a huge fan of the game, but it is a monumental feat of game design.
Yes,
and
exactly.
I remember when Vast came out, and I think I was at Origins or something around the time it came out, and that's all people could talk about. It's like, have you seen this game? It wasn't like, oh, this game is amazing, I love it. They're just like, have you seen this? Have you seen what this dude did?
Exactly.
Like, game design, or the fun or the enjoyment. We're not worried about that right now. And a lot of people love it. It's still a great game. But just the ability to put something like that together and it works. But to your point, it does have some interesting downsides, right? When someone wins, you're like, I really hope you played that correctly. Like, I hope you did the rules. I don't know what the rules for your faction are. So hopefully you got it right.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to play the game a bunch of times, even as one faction, to really grasp what you're doing. And different factions are different levels of complexity and difficulty, and that's something to think about. But you kind of have to play it as all of them to really get the full experience. And so just something to think about. But yeah,
that might be one of those things, like you were saying, that when people love it, they love it. Like, I've met some real Root fans, but like you said, like, they've played every single faction multiple times. So for them, they do know what everyone else is doing. So if you find your people who like really, really love it, and then they invest the time to learn every single mini game within the game, then I'm sure it can be a fantastic experience. But for the average gamer, it's a very long learning time. It takes a long time to learn because you're learning multiple games at once. And then, not really knowing what other people are doing.
Right. Also, as a game designer, now you have to write 5 rule books, which
at least
makes me inside. Like, I hate just the thought of that. Makes me want to go get back into bed and just try again tomorrow. Like, no thanks.
I can't even imagine the play testing for that. Like, let's play with these 4 factions. Now let's take one out and replace the other one. Now take one out. Like, you would have to play test so many different combinations to make sure that they all work together, because it could be broken in so many different ways. Oh, well, my thing won't work because you blocked this. And oh my God, I can't even imagine the playtesting they had to do for those games, especially for Root.
Right. All right. So very different game, but one of my favorites, a game that I believe is perfection. Like, I don't know of a single thing about it that's not just like exactly what it needs to be. And it's called Concordia. You ever play Concordia?
No. Adding it
Phenomenal
to the
game.
list. Yeah.
Again, came out a long time ago, has a ton of expansions at this point, all sorts of different maps and different ways to play. It's from a designer named Matt Gertz. And Matt's a great guy. He's another one that just kind of sees things on a different level. But Concordia, it's got a boring thing. It's trading in the Mediterranean. I mean, but it was one of the ones from a long time ago. So at least there weren't quite as many games back then as there are now. But the idea is that you have your little board, and you're basically moving around the board, building cities and collecting resources, trying to get victory points. And what I love about it is the card system. And it's a system where you start off with a certain number of cards, And each card lets you do a different thing, right? It might be move on the board. It might be collect resources. It might be build a city. It might be copy someone else's last action. All these different things. Collect money. But then there's also a card that you have to play to be able to pick all the other cards you've played back up.
Right.
And so the game is all about timing, because that's a wasted turn. And so when am I going to waste the turn? And do I want to do 2 actions in a row? Well, if I do that, that means I have to play the action, play the card to pick that action back up, and then play that card. So that's 3 turns. And so like, oh man, it's just the tension of that. And then there's this open market of other cards. And these cards are like more powerful versions. So like these other cards might let you get more resources, or might let you buy something without having to spend as much. Right. And so you're trying to balance out, do I want to get these new cards to add to my hand? But if I'm doing that, then I'm not building cities. I'm not collecting, different resources on so I'm not necessarily getting closer to winning. And so it's such a good tension. Yeah. And another thing I love about it, there's no rounds, there's no phases. It's not like step 1, we do it's you play a card, and then the next player plays a card, and we're going to do that until the game ends. And the game ends either when you run out of all the auction cards, like the deck empties, or somebody builds their last city. Then the game ends. And so there's no, like, I just love that idea. And Jamie Stegmaier is a big fan of this too. And I think it's something he tries to do with all his games. Like there aren't, all right, in round 1, this, that, and the other, and we're going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we do round 2. Like, no, we're just going to play. Yeah. And when the game ends, it ends. And oh, it's so phenomenal. And now there's like 10 or 15 different maps, and all the maps are different. And some are big, wide open spaces. Some are like a lot smaller. And so you're kind of having to fight over different resources and different things more. So anyway, Concordia.
Is there area control in that as well?
No, not really area control. But there's a bonus. There's a benefit. If you get to a place first and build a city, anyone else who wants to build a city there has to pay more. So there is a benefit to
pay more. They don't pay you. They just have to pay more.
They don't pay you. It just costs them more. Right. And so there's benefits to getting your stuff out there.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you got to do this, and you got to do that over there, and you got to do this other thing. And you kind of have to, it's this holistic approach, because you kind of have to do all the stuff. You know, you can't be like, all right, I'm only going to buy cards. It's like, well, no. Or I'm only going to build cities. It's like, well, somebody else is going to buy the cards that build cities faster. And even though you're focused on cities, by the end of the game, they're going to do it better than you, because they've built up these combos, right, with these different cards. And so anyway, it's just a phenomenal game. Shut Up and Sit Down did an amazing review a while back about it. And that's one of the things that really turned me on to the game. I was like, oh, okay, if these guys have all these nice things to say about it, I'll check it out. And so it's just a great game.
Yeah, there is something to say like about an incredibly streamlined game like that. I actually really like that. It's kind of the opposite of Robinson Crusoe. Right. I don't know if you've played the game 8 Minute Empire. It didn't make.
Is that from Ryan Lockett?
Yeah. Yes, yeah. I believe so. But it's just a very streamlined area control game where. Yeah, you're just drawing cards, you're playing cards, that's it. Yeah, literally takes 8 minutes to play. And there's just something to be said, like even as a design experiment, as a designer, to try to make something as straightforward and streamlined as that, but still have a fun, engaging experience for the player. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And something just to take away from, because that game accomplishes in 8 minutes what other games accomplish in 60. And it's not necessarily better or worse. It's just preference, you know. Or if you only have 10 minutes, well, we know which game we're playing. So
yeah, exactly. You can play that when you're taking a break from Twilight Imperium.
Exactly. All right, what's your next one?
Yeah, it's Ryan Lockett. I just wanted to confirm that. Okay, so that was in your mind, that was the most perfectly designed game, a perfectly designed game in your opinion. So my next one is actually as close to perfect design game as you can get, in my opinion. I actually made a whole video about why I think that's true. I put it up against, Jamie Stegmaier's 12 Tenets of Game Design, and I put it up against my framework that I work within when I design games, and it hits almost all of them. Not all of them. Maybe one day I'll find a game that hits all of them. But it's called Istanbul, the Dice Game. So it's not the pick up and deliver original Istanbul game. It's Istanbul, the Dice Game. So there's just so many great things about this game. One of the best things about it is I do think it's a fantastic gateway game. So if you're just new to this, or you have friends who you want to bring into the hobby, or someone's interested in modern board games, have them play Istanbul, the Dice Game. And I can pretty much guarantee you they're going to get hooked. They're going to want to play again. And they're going to want to play new and different games. It'll open up them into this whole world of board games. So the idea is you're rolling a handful of dice, which is always fun. And then you're deciding what to do with that die result. And there's a bunch of different fun things you can do. And one of them is you can acquire mosque tiles, which somehow give you abilities for the rest of the game. So you can kind of build up, you level up your player, and you can do more and interesting things as the game goes on, which I think is always a fantastic thing to have in a game. So yeah, it just does a bunch of things really, really well. It's very fast paced, doesn't go on too long, lots of interesting choices. And one thing that's might be a bit silly, but that I like, is that when you're rolling these dice, they're not pips. They're not numbers on dice. They have icons on them. And so in a lot of games, you have to be like, oh, it's a 4. And 4 means I get wood, or like, I don't know. But if you have a little icon of the thing and you're like, oh, I get jewelry, I get this, I get that. There's just something I just like about that, where you're not counting pips. You're not adding 1 pip, losing 1 pip. You're not doing that. You roll, you look at the icons visually, you connect, you know what you got. It makes sense. It's not arbitrarily 4 equals brick or whatever. Yeah, so there's just a bunch of great things going on here. The goal of the game is to be the first to collect 5 rubies. There's a bunch of different ways you can collect rubies, bunch of different strategies you can try out, and just so many different things you can do with the die result. So fantastic game, Istanbul, the dice game.
Very cool. Is there a second edition called Constantinople?
Not as far as I know.
Okay,
no.
Gotcha. Good to know. I would follow up with that. If anyone is interested in games like that, check out Nations, the dice game.
Okay.
Similar vein, where you've got these dice that have different icons, and you're trying to upgrade the dice as you bring in new buildings. You get different dice, and they have different. Some of them have 2 of this and 1 of that. Like they give different dispersions of icons and things like that. And so that's another one to check out. But also, just as a general, like kind of higher level concept.
Yeah.
What is someone doing when they take a game and then turn it into a dice version? What does the translation look like? What do they have to change or cut? Because Nations, the dice game, is very, very different than just the regular Nations board game. They cut 78% of the game and turn it into this dice version, almost to the point where it could be you just put a different title and it's a different game, right? And so what did the designers do and why is another thing just to kind of look at. And so, yeah, go out there and find these kind of long worker placement games and then find their dice counterparts. Catan has a dice version. Check that out and see what's different. Just as
Pandemic has a dice version. I haven't played it, but it looks very different. And this is very different from the original Istanbul game. Very, very different. Definitely simplifies things, makes it a lot faster.
Speaking of dice, my next one, let's go with Sagrada. If you're interested in kind of abstract games, if you're interested in dice manipulation, dice mitigation, Sagrada is a really cool one. You're basically building stained glass windows, and you've got all these really pretty, translucent, colorful dice, and you're putting them in different orders, and you're trying to score points and do different things and move them around and change them. It's really interesting. It's very similar to like Azul, and I know a lot of people love Azul. I don't. I enjoy. It's fine. I'm good at it. Like I win the game. It's not like I lose. I'm like, oh, I hate this game. Like, no, I understand how it works. I just don't like. I don't like the way you take tiles in Azul, and I've seen too many people get screwed over. And the game is really mean if you want it to be, and I think that bothers me a little bit. Sagrada's a little nicer to each other, and so I think that's part of it. But I really like Sagrada. Also, a game from a friend of mine, David Abelson, is called Gartenbau. And it's got that similar, you're moving around, changing different things. It's a flower theme. It's really great. Anyway, it's one worth checking out. If you're designing an abstract game, check out Sagrada, check out Gartenbau. Yes. And just see the choices. See the interesting options that players have on a turn. And then try to figure out, okay, why did they do this? And how did they mitigate that? I don't know. I just think both those games are really good case studies and how to do it effectively. Gartenbau didn't get the reception. That'd be if we ever did a list of like games that were underrated.
Yes.
It would be on my list. I really feel like it should have done a lot better, but it's worth checking out. It's also beautiful. It's also a game production wise. And Sagrada too, right? We're not just talking about games. We're talking about experiences, right? Yes. Laid out on a table, Instagrammable, right? Where people can take a picture of it and it shows up and it looks good online on social media. It's all part of this, right? Azul is a great example. You take a picture of that, people go, ooh, that's a pretty thing. What is that? Tell me more. Versus another browned, soulless Euro game, and they're like, oh, okay, cool. It's just different, and so it's nothing to keep in mind from a product standpoint as a designer. All right, what's next?
So yeah, talking about table presence, my next one has great table presence. It's called Colt Express. So in this game, there's a 3D cardboard train in the middle of the table. So that just will bring people over right away. And that is something to think about as a designer, you know, how you attract, you know, people. If you have great table presence, you will automatically bring people over to your table, whether you're playtesting or if you're pitching. You might grab the attention of a publisher who's walking by. But yeah, there's a 3D train and you're all like bandits trying to rob on this train. But what's interesting is about it is that it uses a programming mechanic. So if you haven't been exposed to this, it's basically where you're going to decide what actions your character will take in what order, and you will lock them in. And then everyone reveals their first action. Those are resolved. Reveal the second action. Those are resolved. So it's called programming because it's like writing code and then hitting run. So it's just an interesting mechanic. I don't know if I love it because you are trying to anticipate, you know, what people are going to do, and your third and fourth actions might be completely useless because the situation has completely changed by then. So it's just an interesting mechanic as a designer to play and to try out. Maybe you'll find that you do like it, but just to be exposed to somewhat of a mechanic that's not used as much in games, that is kind of interesting.
Yeah, so Robo Rally is another one that almost made my list. Have you played that one?
No.
Okay. Very same vein as Cold Express, where it's programming. And I'm going to program my robot, and it's going to move forward 2 spaces, and it's going to push, and going to turn right, and going to do this. And then you let it run. Everybody's just bumping into each other, and you know, their robots are all, you're pushing each other in the conveyor belts and into saws and like all sorts of stuff, right? It's old school. That game's been around a long, long time. Cold Express took that idea and then made it much more thematic, right? How could we do that idea, that concept, on a train with a heist and a shootout and stuff like that? And so that's another cool thought is, how can you maybe take some ideas, some concepts, some mechanisms from games that have been around a long time, have proven to be well-liked, they sell well. How do you take that core and then change it? Change the theme.
Make it better.
Add something to it. Yeah. Take something out. Put it on a train with a heist and a shootout. Like, okay, that's cool. That's cool. And the nice thing is the mechanism's already proven. We know this works. How can we do that mechanism in a different way? See it from a different angle, right? I feel like a lot of times as game designers, we get maybe too preoccupied with coming up with something too new. It's got to be super unique, and no, you've never seen anything like this. Like, there's value in that for sure. But there's also value in leaning into something people are familiar with. They, especially like with deck building, you know, everybody understands. I draw 5 cards. I'm going to play them. I'm going to discard them. I'm going to build. Like, we understand that concept now. Okay, how can you change it just a little bit? Right. But also at the same time, it's okay to make a deck builder that you just draw 5 cards. What if you do that, but now you add a board? This is what Ascension did, right? It's this deck building game, but now we've got a board over here that I'm moving around. And so I'm doing the cards here, but then also moving my pieces and having combat over there. Okay, so now that's different. Even though those concepts have showed up in a million other games, deck building or combat on a board. Like, okay, that's not particularly original, but the combination was super unique.
Yes.
So something else to think about.
Yes, exactly. 100%. Yeah. I always say, like, yeah, one of the reasons to play as many games as possible is to be inspired by all these games that exist and think like, I like this one element of this game and I like this element of this game. What happens if I combine them and smush them together, but maybe then added a little extra in there myself? Yeah, I think that's one of the best things about playing as many games as possible, for sure. And just as you were talking there, just had a couple thoughts about Colt Express, is that Robo Rally makes a lot of sense. The programming mechanic makes a lot of sense because they're robots. Right. They have been programmed, and then they're doing that. That's why it makes sense. In Colt Express, I don't know why I'm shooting if there's no one there anymore. You know,
it's all happening so fast. You know, it's just reacting. Okay. Yeah, we'll play it off like that.
Yeah, no, that is true. Yeah, I guess if you pretend like it's so high speed that when you took the shot, they were there, but then they dropped down to the bottom level. Now they're not there anymore. But if they were maybe robot people, that would make a bit more sense. But one other thing,
would that be called Bolt Express?
Yeah, very good. Love it. But I was gonna say Robot Express. It plays really well on a Board Game Arena, obviously, because the programming mechanic takes a very long time to go, okay, resolve. okay, what's this card? Resolve. Like, but Board Game Arena is boom, 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 boom. It's one of the games that plays better on Board Game Arena than in person, for sure. Yeah, it's very interesting. Definitely.
Yeah. All right. So next one on my list, we're going to go kind of to the opposite end of the spectrum. We've been talking about a lot of complicated games that take a while, kind of heavier, whatever. I'm going to go to a game that's barely a game, basically an activity. And it's called Silly Street. And it's a game for families. It's a game that my kids have loved, especially when they were a little bit younger. And it is silly. It is a silly game of going down this silly street. And it's kind of this roll and move type deal. And every time you land on a space, you draw a card from different places. It's almost like a Trivial Pursuit thing where you draw a card and you're going to have, or Cranium, where you're going to have to do different things, right? You might have to draw, you might have to act something out. You might have to, you've got 30 seconds to run to your room and grab something red and bring it back. You might have a vote. One of them is in there. It's like, who has the worst bedhead in the mornings? And I obviously always got voted as the person. And so all my kids laughed at me, but I also, because I got voted that person, I got to move forward 2 spaces. I was like, well, it works out. You can laugh at me, but I'm now winning the game. And so there's a lot of games on the market like this that as gamers, as game designers especially, we have a tendency to look down our nose at. And we go, oh, this is barely a game. Where are the choices? Where are the interesting decisions? That's a valid criticism. However, Silly Street has probably sold more copies than all my games put together for the rest of my life, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just something to be aware of. Again, what's your target audience? What's the market you're aiming at? And be okay with a game being a little lighter. Because one thing I've found, especially in playtesting, the more I playtest a game, the easier I think it is. But that's because I've played it 100 times. When someone plays it for the first time, they're like, wow, this is too complicated. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is so simple to understand. It's simple for me because I made the thing and I've done it a billion times.
Yes.
So to always remember that someone coming in is going to feel kind of like your experience with Ticket to Ride. Like, that's not a complicated game. But when you don't have experience with it, it's overwhelming because it's so brand new. And so that's something to think about. Also, there's something to be said for a game that is just simple. You put it on the table, you don't have to think. You just roll some dice, see what happens. Another couple of games I wrote down, Shut the Box, which is a game where you're literally just rolling 2 dice and then you're hoping to get certain numbers. That's kind of it. There's like 2 decisions in the whole game. There's Can't Stop, which is another game from the 80s, I think. And you're rolling dice, you're trying to move. It's a push your luck game, but you're really just rolling dice and hoping for the best. People love those games, and they take 10 minutes to play, and it's easy right after dinner, before kids have to get ready for bed. Just throw it out on the table, have some fun, laugh for a minute, have a nice little moment, and then move on about your day. There's so much value in those games. So I just wanted to highlight those.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, as someone who loves party games and loves designing party games, creating those experiences that are easy to learn, easy to get into, easy to understand, but they create those memories and those experiences that you want to create for people and their friends and family. And if you can do it in a clever way, like designing very streamlined, simple games, and I put simple in quotation marks, is difficult. A lot of people can't do it, especially if you want to do something different that hasn't really been done before. But if it does something in a clever way, but in a simple, clever way, I think that's fantastic. And that's what I try to do with my party games. Not have a million different things going on, but have some sort of clever, interesting thing that makes it have that ooh moment when you read the back of the box, and then that creates those moments between players. I think it's great. Yeah, 100%.
And to your point, it's much harder to cut than it is to add.
Exactly.
And so,
exactly.
Yeah. All right. What's next?
Yeah. Well, my next one is definitely not simple. It's Tyrants of the Underdark. So this is a deck building game with area control set in the Dungeons and Dragons fantasy world. So I was also going to put Dungeons and Dragons, but I'm glad that you said it, to have like a role-playing game. So this isn't role-playing, but it's set within the Dungeons and Dragons world. So if you enjoy this, then you might get hooked into want to explore the Dungeons and Dragons world a bit more. But it uses deck building with area control. And I don't think I've played a game that does that before. But it does it in a really interesting way. 2 really solid mechanics that work well together. It just feels like you're playing 2 really good games in one, because you have the deck building going on and you have the area control. So in case anybody doesn't know, area control is just if you have the majority of a region, then you have you control that region, you get points or resource or whatever. So yeah, and then the theme, just the art, the feel of it, you feel like you're in this world. You're building up your army and you're trying to vie for control over the Underdark. So yeah, I thought this was a fantastic game. It took a little bit to get into, but once you, I mean, if you already know the deck building mechanic, you already know the area control, you get into it fairly easily. But the mechanics wise and theme wise all worked really, really well together.
Yeah, very cool. And so piggybacking on that, my next one, also a deck building game, Legendary. And I think these games have some interesting things to think about in how they implement something, but do it in interesting ways, right? It's not just a clone of Dominion, right? It was
Yes.
designers figuring out a way to take the concepts of Dominion, but then turn it on its head and offer something brand new that really appeals to people, whether it's in theme, because Dominion's kind of like, again, we're trading in the Mediterranean, basically. But with Tyrants of the Underdark, okay, Dungeons & Dragons sells, right? And people love fantasy, right? So put it into there.
Yeah.
Or Legendary has like 10 different themes now, and all the games are a little bit different. You have the Marvel, you have 007, you have X-Files, you have Firefly, Alien, The Matrix, which I think just came out. And every game is different. It's the same core, it's the same concept, but it's different, and the changes that they make, they make sense. You're like, oh, okay, because we're doing this whole different universe now, it makes sense that the cards work this way. Still the same, I spend these resources to gain these cards. Cards are moving around this little board and whatever. But it kind of makes sense, more intuitive. And so something I want designers to be thinking about is, can you create a game that's also a system that leans itself into being able to be rethemed?
Yes.
To make more money and to make more games. I mean, Pandemic has had like 20 different versions at this point. There's Cthulhu. There's all sorts of different like time periods. I think like Ancient Rome is one.
Yes.
And they just keep printing money with this, right? So if you can create a system, right? Tyrants of the Underdark, similar kind of thing. Like you could set that in space. You could set that in the Wild West. Like you could take those core concepts of deck building and area control and the way things are moving around on the board and put a new spin on it and have a very, very different game that appeals to either the same audience that wants more of the same, or a new audience that's more interested. They don't like fantasy, but they'll play space. They'll play Wild West.
Right.
Because they have a cool core system. And I don't know, you can productize things in a really cool way if you create a really nice core.
Yeah, 100%. And to build on that, so I've been working on this game for the past 2 years. It's finally coming out next year, so I can't talk about it like in such detail, but it was a game I had to create a system that couldn't necessarily be, I mean, it could be rethemed, but with the idea of scaling it, of being able to add in expansions, to add it, to slot in different characters or add different characters to the world to build it out. So I had to think of how can I make that work, where this game, you can play it with 2, you can play it with 3, 4, or possibly 5, 6 with the expansions. How would they fit in with that? So each player has their own land tiles. And then depending on which players are playing, that's what would create the board. So you could play with 6 because they all come with their own tiles, their own. Yeah, I get I want to talk about this game so bad. When this game comes out, we can talk again. But yeah, just the idea of creating a system that can be scalable, or like you said, can be rethemed to different things is very important.
Yeah, very cool. And just from a business standpoint, anytime you can make a game with a long tail, right, that you build up an audience and then you can keep giving them new factions, new characters, new expansions, right? And again, you're not just making stuff to make it. You're making it because they want it. It's got to be good. You can't just, I made a system and here's a million different ways. It still has to be fun and enjoyable and a good experience.
Yes.
But if you make a game that is so specific, then there's nothing wrong with that. But it's going to be hard to change it. It's going to be hard to add more to it. And again, there's no wrong answer. It's just a matter of just kind of thinking, what do you want to do and how do you want to carry it out?
Yep.
All right. What's your next one?
So was Legendary was yours?
Legendary was mine. Yep.
Oh, okay, cool. Our games seem to be magically kind of aligning to each other. That's
well,
kind of
I'm
cool.
doing. I didn't have them listed in a number.
Oh, you're picking them out.
So
okay.
We're doing it organically. Yeah.
Okay, so my next one is King of Tokyo.
Nice.
By Richard Garfield, designer of Magic the Gathering.
You can't see it, but it's right over my shoulder, right over here.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, literally was again, another one of those borderline ones. I'm glad that you chose almost all of my borderline ones. This is working out really well.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah, no matches yet. So We have one more. Okay, so yeah, in this game, you're trying to be the most powerful monster in Tokyo, and it does a great job of two of the toughest mechanics you can work with as a designer, in my opinion. That's take that and player elimination. So in general, players don't love these. They can generate bad feelings among players. People are waiting around possibly for a long time before they can play again if they've been eliminated. But it does it really well, in my opinion, because first of all, eliminating the other monsters is not the only way to win. You can just build up your own power high enough that you are the strongest, so you win. So you don't have to go after other players if you don't want to. And then player elimination, it's such a fast game that if you get eliminated, you're waiting around max 10, maybe 15 minutes before you can join back in for another game. It's not like Monopoly where you're waiting around for a couple hours before you can get back in. So it takes two tough mechanics and does a pretty good job with them, I would say. But then just in general, it's a fun game. You're again rolling a handful of dice, and it's a Yahtzee roll, so you can re-roll a couple times, try to get what you want, and you can buy cards to power up your character. You can decide what direction you want to go. Do you want to try to, build up resources to buy cards? So you have to increase your health. And there's also a bit of a push your luck aspect to it, where if you're in Tokyo, you can't heal, but then you get more points the longer you stay in there. But if you stay in there too long and your health gets down too low, you have the potential of dying, and that does happen quite often. But you want to stay in there as long as possible. It's so interesting. So there's a lot going on, but it is a fairly simple game, and it's one of my favorites for sure.
Yeah, this is one of the ones that anytime I was playing with new gamers, right? People who are only familiar with Monopoly and Clue and stuff like that. This is one of my go-tos because it's like, okay, you ever played Yahtzee? Pretty much everybody's played Yahtzee. It's Yahtzee,
yes.
But we're going to add a couple more things, and we'll explain them as we go. And there's only a few cards out at a time, so you don't have to explain every card. You just have to explain the few that are out there. Just say, hey, well, this one does this, gives you more energy. Very simple to understand. And I was playing mostly with high school kids down in Honduras, and they all just picked it up real quick, and then they loved it. They, especially younger people, they love Take That. They love destroying you, So that's part of it too. But also I love how anytime I got eliminated for a while, it was my fault because I was trying to do too much. I was trying to push it. I was trying to max out. I was trying to stay in Tokyo and max out on damage everybody else. And that was really what was more important. I wasn't even trying to win. I was trying to do something cool. And it gives you the ability to do that. And it makes sense that that's possible because Richard Garfield designed it. And he also did Magic the Gathering, which is another thing. It's like you have players that want to win. You have players that want to do cool combos. And both are cool. Like it's either strategy is fun. And so that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I love that game. But like we were saying earlier, how can you take a game's mechanism from a long time ago, in this case Yahtzee, and then do it totally differently and make it something special? All right.
Yeah, 100%.
On the opposite end of that, these two are not related at all. My next one is Sleeping Gods, which
I just looked this up the other day. It looks so cool.
Phenomenal. I'm excited for the next one, the Sleeping Gods Part 2, basically Distant Skies, which is somewhere in the shipping process right now. Like it's about to get on people's tables. And because Sleeping Gods, for all its amazingness, it did have some issues, which I think the next iteration is fixing a lot of that.
So there's another example of fixing some things in the next edition. All right.
And it is a massive adventure game. Kind of open world in nature, but you still have these like Euro mechanisms that are controlling like how far you can move, and there's like some resource management and stuff like that. But it is just going back like Root, a phenomenal feat of game design. Even if you don't like it, even if you don't like adventure games and it's not your style, just to take a step back as a designer and appreciate the amount of work and effort that went into bringing it to life.
Even just the book of the narrative. I saw the size of that book. I was like, oh my goodness. That must have taken a long time. It's another one that's
a lot of people's favorite game. A lot of people hate it, but a lot of people, it's the thing that they love most about the hobby. And so just something else to take away from that. But it's got story, it's got puzzles, it's got combat, it's got all these different things that make up this really big, epic adventure. It doesn't hold your hand necessarily. Like it doesn't say go to space F5 and do this. It'll say, oh, you need to go find the jagged rocks. So now you're looking at the map. You're like, okay, which rocks? Okay, that one could be a jagged rock. That one, it's probably this one. Let's go over there and let's see what that is, and let's continue the story. And so you kind of have to figure some things out on your own. It does have one issue where it kind of resets, where as you go throughout the game, you kind of get to different points and like it resets your abilities, it resets your cards. That's kind of an unfun thing that they're fixing in the next one.
Yeah,
But
I don't love that.
no, but I understand I'm designing an open world adventure game in a lot of ways inspired by Sleeping Gods. So my game's called RoboMon. It's kind of like Pokemon, the board game. And
Okay.
Sleeping Gods is not just a great game, I think in general. It's a great game for me as a designer personally, because I saw that game and I was like, oh, there's so much more we can do with board games. And then that inspired me to do some other cool stuff. So from a personal standpoint. But one thing I've learned, this goes back to when I was talking about Twilight Imperium and Dune. How do you make a game that lasts a long time? In this case, like 30 hours of gameplay, but you still keep it interesting and different and fun. And I think what happened was Ryan Lockett ran into the situation was with like, if you just continue to gain cards and abilities, like by the end of the game, you're going to have 100 of these things. And so how do we fix that? Well, we need some resets. We need to do some things that cause that not to happen, because that's just too much going on. And that was his answer. There are better answers. And I think he kind of figured that out in Distant Skies. I'm really excited to see how he's doing it differently. But to keep players engaged for a 30+ hour campaign, that's a challenge, you know. And there's games like Tainted Grail and a lot of the Awakened Realms stuff. They're doing this. They have so much narrative and story and content to get through. How do you make it fun for a long time? Something to think about. But it's hard. It's a big challenge. It takes forever. That's another thing I was talking. I did an episode with Ryan, and I was like, man, how many games could you have designed in the time it took you to do Sleeping Gods? It's like 10.
Yeah.
You know, you could have done 10 other products for the time it took to do that one. So something to think about.
Yeah, it's a big investment.
It really is. It has to be a labor of love. If you don't love it, it's not worth the time, the effort, the money, everything that goes into it.
And if you don't have a publisher who's interested, who has signed a contract to make it, I don't know if I could, like this game that I've been working on for 2 years, that is all I've done for like 2 years. It's also like open world quests and all that. It was with a publisher I signed the contract at the start of the development process. So it's not like, I don't know if I could have the motivation to do something that big without a commitment from a publisher.
Yeah. I would honestly warn a designer against it. If you're not going to do it yourself, like if you're not going to do your own crowdfunding campaign, and because the potential it's hard to find a publisher no matter what. But it's really hard to find a publisher for big games that are expensive, you know, and the amount of time and effort. And I would say
that you maybe just came up yourself and they don't know anything about it. And they might have IPs that they would rather work with. And they might ask you to completely change the narrative to one of their IPs. They have to redo everything.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a tough one.
If you're not going to do it, if you're not going to publish it yourself, I would warn somebody away from diving into it, because it's
epics.
Because like I started working on this game in April of 2020. So where are we at now? It's like September 2023. You know, hopefully it's going to come out spring-ish next year. Like that's the plan. That's a long time. So something to be aware of. All right.
Yeah, 100%.
What's your next one?
Okay, so this is my last one. It's Charterstone. So Jamie Stegmaier's legacy game. I feel like it would probably be on my list of maybe underrated. A lot of people I feel like don't talk about it. But it's a great legacy game. You know, Pandemic Legacy, Ticket to Ride Legacy, they get kind of all the attention. But Charterstone is very cool. So you're basically it's a competitive legacy game, which is interesting. But you're all trying to build up this village, and you're unlocking crates. So there's all these little boxes in the game, and you're opening them up, and you're adding new cards, you're adding stickers to the board, you're changing the board over time, you're building up this land, and just the art is super cute. Opening up the crates is so satisfying. It's so cool to discover new things and add it to the board and make the board unique and different from anyone else's board. Yeah, it's a fantastic game. There's a lot going on. Like Jamie Stegmaier, I don't know how he designs these. We were just talking about that, like Scythe and Charterstone. How much effort goes into these massive games that he makes, and I don't know how he probably has a big team helping him and lots of playtesters and stuff, but it's a lot. It's a big endeavor for sure, especially with legacy games. I don't know how you play test that. That's tough to do. But yeah, it's a great legacy game. I definitely recommend it to check that out, especially if you haven't played a legacy game before and you don't really know what that genre is. It's a very cool concept.
Yeah, Charterstone taps into one of the things that people love in general, which is surprise. What's in the box, right?
Yes.
What new little goodie are we going to find in this box?
Yes.
Especially if it's based on like your own choices. You know, that's another thing.
Yeah.
Some legacy games, it's okay, we're going to open box number 5 because the game told us to. Versus,
Yes.
I'm going to open box number 5 because I did a thing and I traveled over here and I explored this or that, and now I get to open box 5. Like it's my decision. Like that's a cool thing to lean into. And yeah, Charterstone, just a great example of that. Yeah, to your point, like a little underrated. Like people don't really talk about it now.
Yeah.
There's been so many other legacy games come out. So many, not that many, like 10. Like we're not talking about very many because they take so much effort.
It's very weird that it doesn't get the attention that I think
they take forever to design. The same reason there's not a whole bunch of these like really massive open world games. Yeah, I had a really good conversation with Rob Davio just a few days ago where we're chatting about playtesting, and I asked him, "How do you playtest a legacy game?" And he's like, "Oh." Like you can just see the weight, the burden of this, and because you have to get groups that are going to go through the entire campaign. But you have to, but you're also iterating and you're making changes. But you can't necessarily get the same group to do it again because they've already seen stuff, right? So you're constantly having to find new people, and yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah, that's one I don't think I'll be doing anytime soon.
All right, my last one is Arkham Horror, the card game. So this is another example of a really popular game that was then turned into a different version, but in this regard, I think a better version. Arkham Horror is an amazing game. Been around a long, long time. Had some issues, right? It could take way longer than it should. It's like a game that shouldn't last that long. Kind of, it's a lot of luck, a lot of swinginess, a lot of dice. And so they turned it into a card game, and you still get the adventure, even though you're not moving around a board and going to different. You still feel like you're exploring, you're investigating, you're moving from card to card, room to room. But the systems are just so tight, like they're just so good, you know. And you're building your deck based on, you know, you select a character, and you have certain cards that are just generic cards, but then each character has different cards specifically for them. Some are really good, some not so good. So you get some kind of flaw cards in there, and that's kind of interesting, which gives you more replayability. So even though like each box doesn't come with a bunch of scenarios, and honestly is a little overpriced for what you get, but you can play each scenario with different characters and play it out in different ways. And so there's some replayability there. There's a big campaign, so it's like this overarching story. If you're into that, like you can kind of go from, you know, the beginning, middle, and end, and kind of see how the story is going to change and evolve. It can change depending on your choices. It's just a cool game. And then also, Arkham Horror had dice, and you had to get like a 5 or a 6 for success, and you're trying to roll as many dice as possible, but it's still swingy. Well, they replaced that with this bag building kind of system where you're reaching in a bag and you're drawing a token. You're playing cards to get, let's say you need 5 resources, or 5 is your target number. Well, I might play cards, and now I have 4. So I need to draw a token out of the bag, and hopefully I get a +1 or higher. But there's also negatives. There's also instant fails. There's also tokens in the bag that do different things based on the scenario, based on the chapter of the story you're in. So that changes. You can make the bag easier or harder by changing the token distribution in there. So that's kind of cool. Anyway, so they took that idea, that system of, okay, we still want some luck. You don't know if you're going to kill the monster, but we're going to make it a little less lucky, a little less swingy. And I think it was a really cool system. So anyway, Arkham Horror, the card game.
And are you able to add better tokens into the bag as the game goes on? If you do good things, are you rewarded with that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
All the
you can
ones
just set it like the difficulty level.
At the beginning. And you change it depending on the scenario, right? So some scenarios you're going to add different tokens, and a lot of the tokens are generic, and they might mean different things for this scenario. So this icon in scenario A means this, the icon in scenario B means that. And so that can change. But there's also that freedom where if you wanted to, as a game designer, you could go in and kind of like mess with the bag and make things a little bit different.
Yeah.
And so I think that's
what I would want to do. I'd be like, if you succeed at this thing, you can add one more good token to the bag.
Yeah. And that might happen. There's so many scenarios at this point, like so many different versions. They might have added that. The ones I played, I don't think that was part of it. So it very well could be. I don't know why they wouldn't do that. Change the distribution. During
it's still luck based.
Yeah, during the game. You could also make it harder. As Cthulhu comes out, then all of a sudden he adds these really negative tokens in the bag. So now you're more likely to have bad things happen. Mid game, as opposed to from the beginning where you're just kind of getting started. I like when games level when they scale.
Yes.
You know, we go from not a lot going on to at the end, it's like, oh my gosh, there's so many things happening. And
yes,
it's just really tense and stuff like that.
Definitely. You want that arc for sure.
Yeah. Well, Pam, that's a good list you had. I really appreciate. We didn't have any crossover, which.
No, not one.
Cool.
Yeah. I didn't think we would, but that was cool. That was really fun.
Yeah. I mean, I need to do this again. I need to like find other like top 10 topic kind of things. I mean, the Dice Tower has made a living off of doing top 10s for years.
You do top 10, insert whatever, you've got a viral video.
Yeah, absolutely. And but I love breaking it down from a design standpoint because, you know,
exactly
99% of those videos are this game is fun because of X, Y, and Z reason. Whereas it's kind of cool to look at it. This game is not even necessarily good. It's just like, this is a game to be aware of. Or a game to play because of these cool things it has going on. I think this is it's cool. Thank you for suggesting it. I really appreciate you offering up this as a topic.
Yeah, that was super fun.
Well, Pam, where can people find you? I know you've got a really great YouTube channel. That's how I discovered you. You've been putting out some really cool game design focused videos for a while now. So tell people about that and any other place they can find you online.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Gabe. This is super, super fun. So my YouTube channel is Pam Walls Game Design. So I try to put a video out every week. I'm also on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, my website, Pam Walls Game Design as well. So that's where you can find me.
Yeah. You got any games you want to plug or where people can find your games?
Yeah, so my so I have 3 published games. One is Hold That Face with Hasbro, Act Fast with Outset Media, Blob Party with WizKids, and that's the one that just came out at Gen Con. So it is slowly filtering out into stores. Hopefully it gets into a few more. It's definitely available online. It's sold out at Gen Con. It's been getting really good feedback. So I'm really, really happy with that game. It's my favorite party game that I've made so far. It's a cooperative game where you're trying to all become one big blob and you have Play-Doh you can smush together with googly eyes. So it's super fun. So that one for sure. And then hopefully I'll be able to talk about my adventure game coming out next year. It's with Ravensburger, and that's all I can really say right now, but hopefully can announce it pretty soon.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to have you back, and we can dive deep into that game. And hopefully my adventure game is out by then too, and maybe we can just kind of compare notes and see.
Adventure party.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Pam, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.